At my party, he looked at me and said, "You're not good enough for her." She immediately took his side. Then I looked at them both and realized that the most just story of my life had just begun. My name is Lowell Carter, I'm a litigation attorney, and for 3 years I shared my life with a woman I genuinely believed I would marry, Eunice Hale. My days were full of courtrooms, files, tense negotiations, and long hours staring at screens. Coming home to her felt like stepping out of a storm into a warm, light kitchen. Eunice and I met at a small firm where she worked as a paralegal. She was sharp in the ways that matter, detail-oriented, quick on her feet, good at reading people. She had this quiet determination that made you believe she could do anything she set her mind to. When she said she wanted to go to law school and become an attorney herself, I didn't just support the idea, I committed to it. I owned a small, old house on the edge of town. I had spent years restoring it piece by piece, refinishing the floors, repairing the porch, replacing the wiring, repainting every room myself. When Eunice moved in, it finally felt complete. Her books on the shelves, her favorite mug by the sink, her shoes kicked off by the door, the house turned from a project into a home. We split the chores, picked paint colors together, debated over furniture styles. Bills, though, were primarily on me. I made the larger salary, and I didn't mind taking the financial lead. Besides, I saw all of it as an investment, in our shared life, in her education, in the future we were building. I paid her law school tuition from a dedicated account I had set up. A decent car, practical and safe, sat in the driveway with her name on the registration but my name on the purchase agreement. She drove it to classes every day at a top program in the city. We joked that one day, when we were both attorneys, we'd argue opposite sides of a mock case just for fun. It felt solid. It felt intentional. It felt like adulthood done correctly. And yet, through all that stability, there was a faint, constant static in the background. A sense that something wasn't sitting quite right, like a picture hanging just a few degrees off level. The static had a name. Emmett Rhodes. Emmett was, according to Eunice, her oldest friend in the world. They had met in college, bonded over late-night conversations and shared frustration with their families, and had apparently been inseparable for years. If Eunice told the story, he was her platonic soulmate, the person who had seen her at her worst and stayed. Emmett was a freelance illustrator and part-time designer. He called himself an artist in a tone that suggested the rest of us were somehow missing the point of life. The idea of a structured 9-to-5 job made him shudder. He liked to tell people he was allergic to offices. In reality, he designed logos and drink menus for small restaurants and scraped together rent in a small studio apartment. To Eunice, he was loyal, protective, misunderstood by the world but, deep down, good. To me, he seemed like a man who wore nonchalance as a costume while relying heavily on the people around him. There was a pattern to his presence. He would appear, charm a room, drop a few comments that left me looking oddly out of place, and then leave with Eunice feeling nostalgic and slightly restless. He had a particular fondness for talking about Byron, her ex-boyfriend from her early 20s. Byron was a musician who had broken her heart in dramatic fashion, cancelled shows, missed birthdays, grand apologies sandwiched between equally grand disappointments. If I planned a weekend away for Eunice and me, a quiet cabin, a few days at the shore, even just a special dinner, Emmett invariably found a way to bring up some spontaneous road trip he and Eunice had once taken with Byron and a couple of friends. "Remember that night we ended up sleeping under the stars on that hill outside Santa Rosa?" he'd say, looking at her with that soft, reminiscent smile. "We didn't plan anything, we just went." That's the thing about real moments, you can't schedule them. You have to be with people who understand your free side. The comment would sound harmless if you weren't paying attention. But the implication was always the same. There was a thrilling, unscripted life she used to have, and then there was me, the stable, careful, predictable man. Whenever I tried, gently, to suggest that Emmett's behavior crossed lines, Eunice would stiffen. "He's just being Emmett," she'd say. "He was there for me when Byron walked out. You didn't see me back then, Lowell. You don't know how much he helped. He worries about me. He's like family. In my work, I have learned that you cannot convince someone of something they are not ready to see. If you push too hard, they stop listening altogether. So I didn't press. I did what I do in court, I observed. I let things unfold. I waited for the moment when the other side steps too far and reveals more than they intend. I waited for Emmett to hand me the rope. It took time. There were small incidents, little slights, quiet remarks under his breath, that I tucked away in my memory. Each one on its own could be dismissed as oversensitivity on my part. But slowly, the pattern sharpened. He never insulted me directly in a way that would justify a confrontation. Instead, he constructed a quiet contrast, Emmett and Eunice, spontaneous and free, Lowell, steady but dull, useful but uninspiring. I would come home from 12-hour days, exhausted but grateful, and find Emmett on my couch, Eunice laughing at some story from their university days. It wasn't the laughter that bothered me, I loved seeing her happy. It was the subtle way he would throw in remarks like, "Remember when we just took off with no money and no plan? We'd never get away with that now, would we?" Then he'd glance at me with a polite, amused expression, as if to say, "We all know who made that impossible." Still, I held my peace. My belief in Eunice, and in the life we were building, kept me steady. But the static was there. And it was getting louder. Part 2, the night the rope landed on the table. The breaking point arrived disguised as a celebration. 6 months before everything fell apart, I had taken on the most demanding case of my career, a complex commercial dispute that consumed nearly every waking hour. I cancelled plans, missed gatherings, and learned the layout of my office at 2 a.m. as well as I knew it at noon. Eunice carried more of the household load during that time, and I appreciated it. When we finally won, a decisive, career-advancing victory for my firm, everyone insisted I mark the moment. I am not usually a throw a party for myself kind of person, but even I could see the sense in stepping back to breathe and acknowledge the work. So I planned a dinner at our house. We invited my closest friends, colleagues who had stepped in when I was overwhelmed, friends I'd neglected during the long months of preparation, people who had seen me at my most worn down. It was meant to be a night of warmth and relief. I ordered good food, opened a few bottles of wine I'd been saving, and even took the afternoon off to cook a few of my own favorite dishes. Because I wanted Eunice to feel like this was our celebration, not just mine, I told her to invite people who mattered to her as well. She asked, "Even Emmett?" I paused, felt the familiar resistance rise in me, and then pushed it down. "Yes," I said. "Even Emmett." Maybe, I thought, seeing him in a room full of my long-term friends would smooth some edges. Maybe if he saw how we functioned as a couple, he would ease off the constant old times nostalgia. By early evening, the house glowed. Lamps cast warm light, music played at a low volume, and the dining table looked, for once, like something out of a magazine instead of a staging area for case binders. People drifted in with hugs, jokes, and congratulations. Eunice floated between the kitchen and the living room, laughing, topping up glasses, welcoming her own friends as they arrived. Then Emmett walked in. He hugged Eunice a little too long for my taste, complimented her dress in a tone that was just slightly too admiring, and clapped me on the back with a theatrical smile. "Carter, the successful attorney," he announced. "Look at this place. Feels very curated." "Good to see you, Emmett," I said evenly. "Glad you could make it." Dinner started wonderfully. The conversation flowed easily at first, work stories, travel mishaps, questions about Eunice's classes. People toasted, laughed, teased me about my tendency to overprepare. For the first hour, I actually relaxed. But Emmett, after a couple of glasses of wine, began to change the tone. He launched into a detailed description of a recent gallery opening he had attended. "It was one of those nights," he said, leaning back in his chair, fingers loose around the stem of his glass, "where you could just feel that everyone in the room was creating something. You know? No one there was just processing paperwork. It was like breathing a different kind of air." He said it casually, as if it were a neutral observation. His eyes, however, flicked toward me as he spoke. "Some people," he continued, "are driven by deadlines and structures and billable hours. And that has its place, I guess. Others are driven by something else, a kind of creative urgency. Both types of people exist. They just see the world differently." My friend Martin, seated across from him, raised an eyebrow. The tension at the table sharpened, but I stayed quiet. I'd handled more aggressive cross-examinations in courtrooms. I wasn't going to let a tipsy speech at my own table pull me into an argument. I smiled slightly and took a sip of water. Emmett apparently read my calm as an invitation to go further. He turned toward Eunice, his expression softening into something that looked concerned, almost tender. "I just want you to be happy, Eunice," he said. "That's all I've ever wanted. And you know, I think Lowell is a good man. He's steady. He's dependable. He keeps everything running. That kind of support is rare." He paused, letting the words hang there. Then he added, with a faint, almost playful tilt to his head. "But you have to admit, you could do better than this." His eyes met mine as he said this. Not angry, not apologetic, merely assessing, as if stating an obvious fact. The air in the room changed instantly. Chairs creaked as people shifted. Someone's fork clinked against a plate and then went still. Eunice's cheeks flushed a deep red. She did not, notably, look at Emmett with outrage. She stared down at her napkin, clearly mortified that a scene had been created, but not at the substance of what had been said. For me, something clicked into perfect focus. Years of small remarks, gentle teasing, carefully framed comparisons, all of it condensed into that one sentence. You could do better than this. In my professional life, there are moments when a witness says something so revealing that you can feel the energy in the courtroom shift. This felt exactly like that. Emmett had finally said out loud what he had been implying for years. He had handed me the rope. I placed my fork and knife down carefully, aligning them side by side. Then I laced my fingers together on the table and looked directly at him. That's a strong opinion, Emmett, I said, voice steady. I'd like to understand it better. In your view, what does better look like for Eunice? Be specific. Lay out your criteria. He blinked, clearly expecting either anger or a joke, not an inquiry. Come on, Lowell, he said with a nervous chuckle. You know what I mean. Someone who matches her. Someone who lives a more creative life. Who understands her spirit. So, I said slowly, the key qualification is being creative and resistant to structure. And you consider yourself the model of that type of person? He frowned, caught between pride and caution. I understand her better than most, he said at last. Good, I replied. Then you can help us examine something more concrete than impressions. I gestured lightly toward Eunice. As everyone at this table knows, Eunice is in her second year of law school, I continued. An excellent program, not inexpensive. There are tuition payments, books, fees. Those are sizable commitments. At present, I cover those. Voluntarily. Not because she can't, but because I believe in her, and in what we're building together. I watched his expression begin to tighten. Now, I went on, I know you have goals of your own. Art, design, your projects. You've spoken often about how difficult it can be financially. In the last several months, Eunice has helped you more than once, has she not? Color drained from his face, but I did not raise my voice. She has lent you money from the account I fund, I said simply. To fix your car. To help with rent when a client paid late. To cover expenses when a project didn't pan out. She did that because she cares about you. I don't begrudge her that generosity. But it means that, in a very literal sense, I am currently investing not only in her education and our shared home, but also in your ongoing comfort. A suppressed laugh escaped from somewhere further down the table and was quickly smothered. Emmett's jaw tightened. Eunice shot me a look that was half warning, half panic. Lowell, please, she whispered. Not now. I raised a slight hand to indicate I had more to say. Let's also discuss practical matters like transportation, I continued. The car Eunice drives every day, it's safe, reliable, appropriate for long commutes. I bought it for her so she wouldn't have to worry about breaking down on the highway. I turned my gaze back to Emmett. You drive a small convertible with ongoing mechanical issues. When it fails, she worries. She arranges rides, helps with costs, steps in. Again, her kindness. But all of this is made possible by the stability you just framed as something less than she deserves. I leaned back slightly, letting the words settle. So, if I understand you correctly, I said, your position is that a man who provides a home, consistent support, and a fully funded path to a profession is inferior to someone who regularly requires assistance and contributes mainly criticism to the relationship. I let the silence stretch for a heartbeat. Is that an accurate summary of your view? I asked calmly. The table was utterly still. Emmett opened his mouth, closed it, and then looked away. From a purely professional standpoint, I knew I had made my point. But the true verdict that night was not going to come from him. It was going to come from Eunice. Part 3, The Ultimatum and the Quiet Choice. The silence after my question sat heavy over the table. Emmett stared at his plate. He didn't answer, and for once, he had no clever retort. My friends watched him with a mixture of disbelief and restrained frustration, their earlier suspicions now reinforced by facts rather than intuition. I shifted my attention to Eunice. She looked stunned, not because anything I had said was untrue, but because I had brought it all into the open. Her face moved through several expressions in quick succession: shock, embarrassment, discomfort. I saw something else there too, a flicker of realization. But it was buried under something louder: anger. She pushed her chair back abruptly. The scrape of wood on wood sounded loud enough to make everyone flinch. I cannot believe you just did that, she said, her voice low but trembling. You turned a dinner for your friends into an interrogation of mine. He made a claim, I replied quietly. I asked him to support it. You humiliated him, she shot back. In front of everyone. You catalogued everything you've ever done for me like you were presenting invoices. I took a slow breath. I presented facts, I said. He suggested that you could do better than the person who has consistently shown up for you. The least I could do was test that theory in the open instead of letting his hints keep piling up unanswered. Her eyes blazed. "You don't get to talk to him that way," she said. "You don't get to dissect our friendship like it's a case file." Her choice of pronoun struck me. Our, not ours. "He has been undermining us for years, Eunice," I said, still calm. "Always in half comments and stories about what used to be. Tonight, he said out loud what he's been implying all along." I responded. If anyone humiliated him, it was himself. She shook her head, breathing hard. "Apologize," she said suddenly. I blinked. "To whom?" "To Emmett," she said. "Right now. You will apologize for speaking to him like that. For dragging money and support and your so-called investments into the middle of dinner. You will tell him you were out of line." "No," I said. It wasn't defiant. It was simply firm. Her cheeks flushed deeper. "I'm serious, Lowell," she said. "Apologize. Or we're done." The words were not shouted. In fact, her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. But the room heard them as clearly as if she had stood and announced them like a verdict. It is strange when the moment that defines your future arrives in such plain packaging. Everyone froze. Emmett's eyes darted between us. My friends looked from her to me, understanding that something had just shifted in ways that would not be easily reversed. In that instant, several thoughts crossed my mind. 3 years of shared mornings and late-night talks. Long days where she would bring me coffee and remind me to eat. The way she had listened when I vented about difficult clients. The hours I had spent explaining cases to her, thrilled by her sharp questions. And then, the countless small ways she had made room for Emmett's criticism of me. The stories she had allowed him to tell again and again, always casting our life as safe but dull. The way she flinched more at my response than at his original insult. If you had asked me 1 year earlier whether I would ever walk away over a single sentence, I would have said no. But this was not one sentence. It was the final piece in a long pattern. Tonight, she had been given a clear choice: stand with the partner who had poured time, energy, and resources into a shared future, or rush to defend the friend who persistently chipped away at that future. And she had chosen. I felt something inside me settle. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not list more examples. I simply looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time without the haze of hope. Then I smiled, a small, tired, entirely final smile. Without a word, I stood, picked up my glass, and walked out of the dining room into the kitchen. I set the glass down on the counter, leaned on my hands for a moment, and exhaled. Behind me, I heard chairs scrape, whispered voices, the rustle of people deciding what to do in the wake of a conversation they had not expected to witness. Eventually, guests excused themselves one by one. A couple of my friends peeked into the kitchen to ask if I was all right. I told them I was, and in a way, it was true. I felt more clear than I had in a long time. Eunice left with Emmett. It was a small procession of indignation. She grabbed her bag, avoided my eyes, and walked out with him at her side, his shoulders straightening as if he had somehow been vindicated. They did not say goodbye. For the next 2 weeks, there was no middle ground. She called. I let it go to voicemail. She texted, at first angry, then outraged, then bewildered. "You embarrassed me. You should have known I didn't mean it that way. You're blowing up our life over one argument. We just need time to cool down." The tone shifted gradually to pleading. "Please pick up. We can talk about this. I miss home. I'm sorry about my words, but you started it." I did not respond. Mutual friends reached out, letting me know that she and Emmett were staying in his small apartment, that things were tense, that she was waiting for me to be reasonable. Some suggested I should at least talk to her once. What none of them fully understood was that the talking had already been done, not in one night, but over years of choices. The dinner had not created the problem. It had illuminated it. Instead of engaging, I turned my attention to something I knew how to handle: practical steps. My house no longer felt like a shared space. It felt like a scene after a verdict. I spent a weekend going through every room, methodically separating what was hers from what was mine. Clothes, books, kitchen items she had brought in, decor she had chosen, I folded, wrapped, and boxed all of it carefully. There was no anger in the actions. It felt, oddly, like administrating an estate after someone had passed away. Not spiteful, procedural. Each box got a label. I stacked them neatly in the spare bedroom. Her drawers and shelves stood empty, not in a dramatic way, but in a clean one. Then I changed the locks. Not because I expected her to break in, but because the foundation of trust that justified her having keys to my home had been removed. I updated the security codes and removed her profile from the system. After that, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and considered the other forms of support I had been providing. Everything I had done for Eunice, I had done with a clear assumption that we were partners, building something together. When she had doubted herself, I reminded her that we were a team. My investments were not charity, they were, in my mind, contributions to our shared future. She had publicly declared that the existence of that future hinged on whether I apologized to a man who had been actively undermining it. She had chosen over. My responsibilities, therefore, changed. I picked up my phone and looked at a familiar contact, Dean Kessler, the admissions director at Eunice's law school. We had met during alumni events, I had contributed to a small scholarship fund the previous year and had been on a panel about professional ethics. I dialed. "Lowell," he said when he heard my name. "What can I do for you?" "Dean Kessler," I said, keeping my tone professional, "this is somewhat personal. I wanted to let you know that the private fund I established to cover Eunice Hale's tuition will be ending immediately." There was a pause. "I see," he said carefully. "Is everything all right?" "There has been a permanent change in my personal circumstances," I replied. "I will no longer be able to sponsor her enrollment. I wanted to make sure the school had time to adjust its records so there are no surprises for your office." He thanked me for the notice and asked a few procedural questions. We ended the call on polite terms. Next, I called Mr. Langford, the managing partner at my firm. Months earlier, I had persuaded him to offer Eunice a coveted summer internship. It was the kind of position that can launch a young attorney's career. "Langford," he answered. "What's up, Carter?" I explained that a serious, unresolvable conflict had arisen in my personal life that made her placement at our firm no longer viable. I emphasized that it would create complications both for me and for her if we proceeded. He sighed. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "We'd already started paperwork." "I'm sure," I said. "I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll take responsibility for any fallout." "Understood," he said at last. "We'll withdraw the offer." I hung up, set the phone down, and sat for a long time in the quiet. I felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction. What I felt was closer to alignment, my actions now matched the reality of the relationship. The structure I had been funding no longer existed. Redirecting my energy away from it was, to me, simply an honest acknowledgement of that fact. 2 weeks after the dinner, the doorbell rang. It was time for the final conversation. Part 4, The Doorway and the Consequences. I knew it was Eunice before I even checked the camera. There is a particular rhythm to the way someone you know knocks, a hesitation, a pause, a second try. When the bell rang twice in quick succession, followed by a short knock, I opened the security app and confirmed what I already suspected. She stood on the porch in a heavy coat, hair pulled back, eyes circled with fatigue. She tried her old key first. When it failed, confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by anger. Finally, she pressed the bell. I slid the security chain into place out of habit and opened the door a few inches. "Lowell," she said. Her voice carried less fire than the night of the dinner, more frayed edges. "We need to talk." "No, Eunice," I said gently. "We don't. But I'll listen to what you want to say." She took in the chained door, then the calm in my voice, and frowned. "You changed the locks," she said. "I did," I answered. "After you left, you made it clear that our relationship was contingent on my apology to Emmett. I chose not to give that apology. That meant the relationship was over. Changing the locks was simply following through." She exhaled sharply. "You're really going to throw away 3 years over one moment," she said. "Over one sentence I spoke when I was upset." "It wasn't one sentence," I replied. "It was the moment when your loyalties became visible. You were presented with a choice between defending the person who has spent years investing in your life, or the person who has spent years quietly diminishing it. You chose him. I heard you." Tears pooled in her eyes, but she pressed on. "I was angry," she said. "I felt cornered. You made me look ungrateful in front of everyone. Emmett was humiliated. I reacted." "You reacted honestly," I said. "That's what made it so clear." She swallowed hard. "Things with Emmett are not what I thought they would be," she admitted, voice cracking slightly. "The apartment is small, he's struggling, we argue constantly. I miss home. I miss what we had. I miss you." There was a time when those words would have softened me immediately. That time had passed. "I believe you," I said. "I believe you missed the stability, the comfort, the reassurance that your future was structured and safe. But longing is not the same thing as loyalty." She winced, as if I had physically struck her. "Can we at least talk about practical things?" she asked. "My final semester tuition is due next week. I went online and the account says funding is pending review. I tried calling the bursar's office and they told me the private sponsorship had been withdrawn. I don't understand what's going on. I held her gaze. I called the dean 2 weeks ago, I said. I informed him that I can no longer sponsor your education. The arrangement was based on our partnership. When you ended that partnership, the basis for the support ended as well. The color drained from her face. You can't be serious, she whispered. I am months from graduating. I have put everything into this. So did I said quietly. Time, money, belief. I still think you can be an excellent attorney. But the responsibility for finishing that path is no longer mine. Her voice dropped. I do not have that kind of money, Lowell, she said. I cannot pay for this semester on my own. I cannot take out more loans. They told me I've reached the limit. If I cannot cover the amount, I have to withdraw. Do you understand what that means? Yes, I said. It means there are consequences to burning the bridge you're standing on. She shook her head, tears spilling over now. What about the internship? She asked, almost breathless. I reached out to the firm last week to confirm details, and they told me the offer had been rescinded. They would not tell me why. Did you speak to them? I did, I said. I told Mr. Langford that our personal situation would make your placement at the firm untenable. It would be uncomfortable for everyone involved, including you. Her shoulders sagged as if someone had added weight to them. That internship was everything, she said. It was my way in. Without it, She broke off, covering her mouth with her hand. Her eyes shone with a mix of shock and dawning comprehension. You cannot do this, she said finally, voice trembling. This is my life. These are my dreams. You cannot just revoke everything because you are hurt. I am not acting out of hurt, I replied. I am acting out of clarity. My efforts on your behalf were always anchored in the understanding that we were building a life together. You told me, in front of a room full of people, that life was contingent on my submission to your friend's feelings. I declined. The partnership ended. The support ends with it. Her expression hardened through the tears. So that's it, she said. You are leaving me stranded, knowing I cannot fix this by myself. I am leaving you where you have placed yourself, I said. You chose to prioritize Emmett's pride over our relationship. You chose to walk out with him. You chose to stay with him. Now you will need to choose how to navigate the consequences. She glanced past me into the house, perhaps expecting to see some sign that this was all a bluff, that her things were still in place, that she could walk back in and resume her old life if she said the right words. What she saw instead, through the narrow gap, were unfamiliar spaces, surfaces cleared, shelves rearranged, the subtle emptiness where her presence had been. Where are my things? She asked, voice small. In the spare room, I said. Packed carefully. You can arrange a time to have them picked up. If you prefer, I can hire a service to deliver them to an address you choose. But you will not be moving back into this house. She stared at me for a long moment, as if searching for some sign that I would crack, that the man she had known would step in and say, all right, enough, come inside, we'll work this out. That man had already done his part. I had held steady through years of small cuts. I had paid, supported, listened, encouraged. I had given her the benefit of the doubt more times than I could count. When the defining moment came, she had used it to measure my value against Emmett's and found me lacking. There was nothing left to negotiate. Please, she said finally, voice breaking. Lowell. I made a terrible choice. I see that now. Emmett cannot carry what you carried. He cannot give what you gave. I feel like I destroyed everything. Please, just give me one more chance. My heart did not harden at her words. If anything, it softened, but not in the way she hoped. I felt genuine sadness for her. Not for what she lost with me specifically, but for the reality that she had sabotaged her own dreams by siding with someone who could not support them. I hope, I said calmly, that you find a way forward. I truly do. You have worked too hard to let it all disappear. But any future you build from here will not include me. I let that linger, then added. You asked me at that dinner to define what done meant. You said, apologize or we're over. I chose over. This is what that looks like. The support stops. The investment ends. The person building the structure steps away. She stood motionless, tears running down her cheeks, for several seconds. Then she nodded, once, a small, stiff motion, turned, and walked down the steps. She did not look back. I closed the door, disengaged the chain, and leaned my forehead lightly against the wood. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel destroyed. I felt finished. Part 5, Justice Without Noise. In the weeks that followed, news about Eunice reached me in fragments. I did not go looking for it. I muted her on social media, archived old messages, and focused on rebuilding a sense of normalcy in my own life. But mutual friends talked, and snippets of her new reality filtered through. She was unable to secure emergency funding for her final semester. Between existing loans and the sudden loss of my sponsorship, the numbers simply did not add up. After exhausting appeals and conversations with the school's financial office, she withdrew. 3 years of effort stopped within sight of the finish line. The internship at my firm, as she had discovered, was no longer on the table. Other positions were scarce, and those available did not carry the same weight. She took on more hours at a small legal clinic, trying to stay connected to the field she loved while figuring out what came next. She and Emmett continued living together. According to those who visited, the arrangement was far from the romantic, free-spirited life she had once associated with him. The apartment was cramped, his income remained inconsistent. The very qualities she had once found charming, his aversion to schedules, his dislike of structure, his disdain for ordinary work, now presented practical problems. Bills arrived on time, regardless of inspiration. Groceries did not buy themselves. Broken appliances did not respond to philosophical discussions about art. Eunice, no longer buoyed by the knowledge that tuition was covered and a prestigious internship awaited, found herself carrying more of the emotional and logistical weight. Resentment grew, not just toward me, for withdrawing support, but toward Emmett, for being unable to fill the space she had assumed he could. He, in turn, struggled with her frustration. He had imagined that, if she chose him, it would validate the story he told himself about the value of passion over stability. Instead, he now shared a small space with a partner whose daily mood was shaped by a sense of loss and disappointment. He got what he said he wanted, one friend remarked to me over coffee. Except now he cannot afford it, and it does not look how he imagined. I nodded but said little. People occasionally tried to frame the situation as a kind of revenge fantasy, the man who walked away, the woman who learned the hard way, the friend who discovered he could not replace what he had mocked. But I never saw it that way. Revenge, to me, implies a desire to cause harm. I did not want harm for Eunice. I wanted clarity for myself. Walking away did not magically erase the good moments we had shared. It did, however, honor the fact that a relationship is more than memories and affection. It is also judgment, choices, priorities. When those turn against you, staying becomes less an act of love and more an act of self-abandonment. Over time, the house that had once felt like a monument to a broken plan began to feel like mine again. I rearranged furniture, not to pretend she had never been there, but to reflect the person I was now. I moved my desk closer to a window with better light. I repainted one room a different color, partly for the change and partly to mark a new chapter. On weekends, I invited friends over again, not for large gatherings, but for quiet evenings, games, simple meals. I caught myself, one quiet afternoon, standing in the doorway of the spare room where her boxes had once been stacked. They were gone now, picked up by a moving service I had scheduled on her request. The room stood empty, sunlight on bare walls. It did not feel like loss. It felt like space. Months later, at a colleague's birthday gathering, I met Miriam. She was an environmental engineer, of all things, practical, meticulous, with a dry sense of humor that surprised me in the best way. We talked first about nothing important, the food, the music, a book someone had left on a side table. When work came up, she spoke of long-term projects, careful planning, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing a design hold up under stress. She did not romanticize chaos. She valued commitment. She paid her own bills, managed her own life, and did not seem interested in anyone who might see that as a flaw. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night. I did not declare anything to myself about fate or second chances. I simply felt open. Willing to see what might grow between two people who understood, from the outset, the value of steady effort. Looking back now, with more distance, I can say this. The most powerful thing I did in that entire story was not the speech at the dinner table, or the calls to the dean and my firm. It was the moment I chose not to argue when Eunice gave me an ultimatum. She said, "Apologize or we're over." For the first time in a long time, I did not try to explain myself into being chosen. I did not negotiate for the relationship. I did not plead my value. I let over mean exactly what it sounded like. In a world that often tells you that the measure of love is how much you are willing to tolerate, there is a quiet kind of justice in deciding that respect is not optional. That if someone demands you betray your own dignity to keep them, you are allowed, even required, to step away. Eunice wanted to know what it meant when I said I was done. Now she knows. It did not mean raised voices, public scenes, or dramatic gestures. It meant the support stopped, the investment ended, and the person who had been holding the structure together finally set down the tools and walked off the site, leaving her not in ruins, but in the reality she had chosen for herself. There is a certain satisfaction in that. Not the satisfaction of seeing someone else struggle, but the satisfaction of knowing you did not abandon yourself in the process of trying to save a relationship that had already ruled against you. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.